amendments, which I did circulate, and I probably should send them through again, and I'll do that in a minute. But look, I'm really glad that the staff have come back with this recommendation, which will see us increase our hours of service at no additional cost. That's fantastic, and I'm sure it will be welcomed by all patrons. I think that it is important that we engage in the community consultation, and I just want to clarify in one amendment that that consultation will occur within the libraries, although I think that's pretty clear in the report. The more substantive amendment which I'd like to put is that we receive a short report on a possible future trial of late night library opening hours as a community service to combat social isolation. This is something that's been trialled in Melbourne, and the council that has trialled it received funding from the state government as a gambling harm minimisation program. We know that we were told during the briefing that if we left the library open until midnight, people would stay, and I think that's true. I think for many reasons, libraries are a safe and comfortable place for people experiencing social isolation, and I think it's important for us to think about whether this would be something that we could successfully trial here. Preliminary discussions about this suggested that it is something that we might be able to look into, and we might be able to obtain state funding to do this. And please correct me if I'm misrepresenting our conversation, but I recall having some discussion about the opportunity for some state funding to support this kind of trial. So I'll circulate the wording now, and I also, when I sent around this wording to all the councillors, I also sent around a news article favourably reporting on the trial in Melbourne.
Okay, thank you for that. So we've got the primary motion from Councillor Green, Councillor De Cruz, got an amendment from Councillor Kiat. Councillor Stamoulis.
Fellow councillors, I'd like to propose the following amendment, that council opens neighbourhood libraries up between 10 p.m. and 2 p.m. on a Sunday. 10 a.m. Sorry, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. on Sundays. And the reason is I believe that establishing these little community areas, community hubs, is extremely important. I believe that they would get solid patronage on those days from families. Those people that work during the weekdays find it difficult to get to the library on a weekday. And I think it would add to the activity and environment in those business zones as well. So I would like to put that to my fellow councillors. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. So we've got a second amendment from Councillor Stamoulis. Further discussion, councillors?
I just want to ask a question through the chair.
Yes.
To the relevant officer. In terms of the consultation that's actually going to happen in the library itself, I just want to be sure that the actual users of the library are being consulted and are able to put in a submission as to what they think about the change of hours, and that we're actually talking to them in situ. So if you could just outline how that's going to happen, that'd be great.
Okay, I'll put that question to the officers.
Through the chair. What we had thought we would do is...
It's on, you just need to speak to it.
Sorry. Can't see you now.
Yeah, sorry.
What we plan to do is count on a sort of 15-minute basis and see how many people are in the libraries between 5 and 8, Monday to Friday, and then also in the morning. And then also we've been working with the engagement team for the Your Say, and it asks a simple question, which is, we're planning on harmonising the library hours. This is what we're proposing. Do you agree or disagree, yes or no? And if so, why not, or why? And then asking them which library they're in, and we would have the librarians ask the staff to do that, and then we'd also promote it via social media and council's Your Say site, and then also through our online email newsletters as well.
Okay, thank you for that.
Sorry, just to clarify, there'd also be some sort of hard copy in the
We can easily put a hard copy in there, yeah, with some printouts, and they just say yes or no.
Okay. Could I just move as a further amendment that there also be hard copies of the survey available in each of the libraries and a submission box for them to be submitted to. Let's add that as an amendment.
Okay. So that's a further amendment. Now got 3 amendments. Councillors, further discussion? If not, I'll go to Councillor Macri. If you could confirm whether you wish to incorporate those amendments into the primary motion and make your right of reply.
Councillor Stamoulis is saying that council open-able libraries. I think that's a real difficult one because it's has budgetary impacts, and in light of the budget, I'm not sure if I'm prepared to support that as yet. I think we need to really look at what we're adding into the budget and have that established where we're at before we start adding new things. It's a line I'll be taking on that. That Councillor Porteous, that there'd be hard copies available to all libraries in the submission box. I'm happy with that.
I'm going to have to rule out of order, but I will come to Councillor Stamoulis to offer him the opportunity to identify the funding source. But if one's not identified, then I will have to rule that amendment out of order. An alternative could be to include that as an option in the public exhibition. It's just a determination to open for additional hours with operational costs. Can't be included without the funding allocation. Councillor Stamoulis, how would you like to proceed?
Mr Mayor, given that neighbourhood libraries are currently getting 21 hours a week less than the other libraries, I was trying to address that a little bit. So therefore, can we put that into the consultation process, that be an option that's considered for Sunday usage? That's a very important question to ask.
So that would now read that council consult on opening neighbourhood libraries between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. on Sundays?
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, Councillor Macri.
Yeah, okay, I'll happy to accept that. If it's just to find that if there's a desire and a need for it, perhaps, but we'll still have to identify a funding source. That's fine.
Yeah. And then Councillor Porteous' amendment?
Yes, hard copies, that's fine. Very happy to hear a keenness on process.
They're all incorporated. Do you wish to make a right of reply, Councillor Macri? Okay, I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Next item, item 2, draft compliance and enforcement policy. Discussion? Councillor McKenna.
The recommendation as printed.
Do you wish to speak to it?
Just briefly, I'd just actually like to pose a question, and so long since I've actually looked at it, just in relation to the way, where is it? Oh, in the protocol, page 66, in relation, it seems like that the only way we actually hear about non-compliance issues is through people making formal complaints. I've always yearned for the day when all council staff, officers, councillors, whoever, can actually identify issues without it waiting for a complaint from some member of the public or whoever makes them. So I would be interested to know, through the Mayor to the officers, do we only respond to complaints, or do officers ever initiate the identification of issues?
I'll put that question to the Group Manager.
Through the Chair, we do investigate complaints, but as well as that, we do proactive measures. We have in our delivery plans, we have a brothel audit program, we have an awning, unauthorised awning or hazardous awning audit program, and we are looking at doing expanding that to other illegal building work and so forth as well.
Right, because the hazardous awnings issue is one of a pet complaint of mine, a pet issue for me, and I see the problems, and I haven't been raising them, but maybe I should start doing that again, because the last thing we want to see is an awning falling down on passers-by, as has happened in the past, not in our area, in other areas. So otherwise I'll support the policy.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for the motion?
I'll second it.
Councillor Passos will second it. Do you wish to speak to it?
Yeah, I don't know. What page is this on? I read this when I was at home.
5? No.
66.
What is it? 55.
No, just 55.
All right, what I want to know here on this issue, does it come under, when we have got people from, staff members from different departments driving around the municipality, when they see something, do they have an obligation to report it to the different departments, like dump rubbish or illegally parked cars blocking something, or branches that are down, or garbage tins still all over the road and blocking driveways? Do they have an obligation to report these things, or do they only look at what they're out on the road for?
I'll put that question to the officers.
Through the chair, they are obligated to report these matters, particularly for potential public risk and hazards. Yes. To all the regulatory officers are required to do that.
Okay, and are we going to have a number that we can call in emergencies, but for different areas, like 3 different numbers, or are we going to have one just for the whole area, which I think is pretty big and would be quite problematic? As I've stated before, people don't know where Ashfield is, the people I ring, but there are a lot of issues and you can't just think of them at the moment until residents ring you up. I, to the best of my ability, put the resident onto the appropriate departments like police, fire brigade or water board or things like this, but a lot of residents, especially people from non-English speaking background and the elderly, it's a bit problematic for them to go through to try and get all those contacts. Are we looking at having something like that implemented? Because I can tell you it will also take a lot of strain off our staff. Because if we're putting on a lot of staff for Greenway and ethnic liaison officer, sports officer, this officer, I think we should have, we should be looking at putting somebody on, or staff that we already have, designated to one area that they can follow up on all these, even if it's weekend work like the library. Because it's pretty hard. Sometimes I've tried to ring. I've caught people in the act of illegal dumping and the staff are not always at the phone, at the desk. We can't always contact the senior staff. For the senior staff to contact the rangers and the rangers. So I really do believe we need one point of call, and that point of call can contact the different departments. Unless you've lived it to know how problematic it is, I would say at least 4 people I've caught in the act of illegal dumping, and only once I rang the council and the ranger was able to come out and catch them in the act.
Okay. Councillors, further discussion? There's no further discussion. I'll go to Councillor McKenna for a right of reply. If not, I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Item 3, what was previously item 9, licence agreements for Chrissie Cotter Gallery. Yes, Councillor Macri.
Chair, I'm concerned. I mean, I like to support the arts and a lot of the community stuff that we do, but when I break down the actual people are paying to use the gallery, it's about $1.40 a day. They don't pay for any electricity, any water. Could I defer this matter for some sort of, go back to the arts and say, listen, can we ask you to contribute a little bit more because council is in some tight economic times? I mean, can we see if there's a little bit more they could do to help us, help them? Because it is a significant actual facility, and it's a great facility, and I support the artists getting it, but I just need to see a little bit more than $1.40 a day. I struggle.
Okay, I've got Councillor York, then Councillor Hesse.
As far as I'm aware, the recommendations that are in the report, which I sought clarification about from the officers who wrote the report, are a simple administrative change just to ensure that current practice can be continued under a new regime of the management of Crown lands. So it's just a simple continuation. I'm not sure that there's a necessity to review our entire arts policy off the basis of that small administrative change. So I'm happy to, if we really need to defer it, but I wouldn't be supporting a massive change in our policy as a result of this small administrative change at all.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hesse, then Councillor Passos.
I'm happy to second the motion as it appears in the books, and I'll speak to it briefly. I also, well, I'll move it in that case if no one's. Deferrals be moved. I'll foreshadow the motion as it appears. I'm sorry, I'll foreshadow it as it appears on page 598. And I too sought clarification from the relevant member of staff, and I thank Earl for her time. As Councillor York has said, this is no change from the pre-existing situation. Very briefly, of course, the idea, most of our artists who contribute an enormous amount to the inner west area also live on the smell of a rag which was once oily, if they're lucky. On a good day, I think we're looking to save pennies in the wrong spot, quite frankly. I'm not unsympathetic to Councillor Macquarie's larger point, which is that it is useful to be able to see, well, I'm going to extrapolate. I believe it is useful for us as councillors to look at our whole program in the budgetary process and to go through it line by line, not in a briefing, but in workshops where we actually understand what's in the budget. But that's not what Councillor Macquarie's asked for. I don't believe that this should be pulled out on its own, because I think what we're doing, as I say, is continuing a long-running and successful gallery which has supported the artistic community of the Inner West and beyond for many years very successfully, and one which adds an enormous amount of value to our community in so many tangible and intangible ways. It will be a grievous loss, and I think misplaced penny pinching to target artists of all people to charge them more. Thank you.
Councillor Passos?
Yes, well, I don't differentiate between artists and the ordinary ratepayer. The ordinary ratepayer has, whether it's a business person or an employee, they get no special benefits. So I don't know why artists should get special benefits. And have we looked at and have we raised it with these people that have a product to sell? Have they been out to look out for sponsorship, or is it easier just put your hand out and come to the council and ask for help? And as for artists living on the smell of an oil rag, well, isn't that what they're supposed to do if they're true artists? That's what I thought. But I'm afraid to say we've got to stop all this. I've been looking for nearly 2 years for premises for abused children. People that are willing to pay. And we don't seem to have any premises. But we seem to have premises for everything else that is costing council money. The artists only attract a certain element of the municipality and not a great element. And they have a product to sell. And I believe when you have a product to sell, Why should you get special benefits just like any other business in the municipality that has products to sell? They have to pay for garbage, they have to pay commercial rates, they get nothing from the council. What is the difference here? And if we are supporting these artists, why are we paying through the nose for leaflets and everything to go out and for graphics? Why aren't these people paying the council back? Do we see them? Do we talk to them about this? We are not a charitable organisation. We are a council that has to deliver. We have budgets. We are taking ratepayers' money and we have a responsibility to make sure it's spent in the proper manner. I will go along for this deferral, and a lot of the things I raised should be looked at.
Okay, councillors, further discussion. Councillor McKenna.
Look, we can defer this, there's no doubt, but this is for short-term leases, 2 to 3 weeks. We all know what happens to buildings if they're not occupied. And the conclusion on page 599, it's a very brief report, it says that while as council undertakes a review of its facilities, there is a need to create short-term licences at this gallery to ensure the facilities continue to be used. Ultimately, we're going to have to be making decisions about all of our facilities, but in the meantime, it needs to be able to continue.
Councillors, further discussion? If not, I'll go to Councillor Macri for his right of reply.
I'm happy to second the foreshadowed motion of Councillor Hesse.
Okay, yes.
Actually, can I speak to it briefly before the right of reply?
Since you've got in and pointed out that there was no seconder for the foreshadowed motion, I guess so.
Oh, they're mates tonight. That looks lovely. Isn't that good?
I guess to me, you know, we also have to remember the fact that this is not just about the artists themselves, but it's actually the wider contribution to the community that is actually what is part of the Chrissie Cotter Gallery, and it's actually incredibly good value for money because we are providing a space for artists and emerging artists, and we're also providing an opportunity for people to engage with artists and for the community to have exposure to different genre of art and to be part of that creative process, which is incredibly valuable, and even more valuable within an urban environment where we have limited space to be able to do this, and I think each space that we are able to use for cultural and for the arts is highly valued by the community. So I think we should be looking at it from that perspective, and not only from the perspective of how much it costs per day for the artists themselves to hire the site, and I think it's something that really we should be ensuring is resolved quickly and we move forward, and we reconfirm that this is a fair and proper process, and the additional benefits are part of the overall benefits that we are gaining from this gallery. We shouldn't be questioning this. This has been something that has already an important status in the local community.
Councillor Macri.
Thanks, Chair. I think people have misunderstood what I'm asking for. I'm asking for a deferral to contact the artists to see if they have any capacity to offer a little bit more in assistance to the council in helping them provide a space. I'm not saying that it has to be. I'm saying talk to them and ask them. That's all it is. Now, if we can't talk and ask our community for assistance to help them, it is difficult. If we can't have an open, honest dialogue, they might come back and say, no, we've got no capacity. They might come back and say, you know what, $1.40 a day is too much. We can't afford that. And then we'll make it 50 cents a day. I said, but why not have the conversation and actually talk to them? Treat them as the community and respect them. I didn't say to go out and charge them commercial rates. I said, ask them if they had any capacity to assist council, because council is in tough times at the moment. And I think There's nothing wrong with admitting that if you want the community's assistance to understand what you're doing up here. That's all.
Okay, we'll now deal with the primary motion, which is moved by Councillor Macri, seconded by Councillor Passos. If that's defeated, we'll then consider the foreshadowed motion. Primary motion is for deferral. The foreshadowed motion is for adoption of the officer's recommendation. I'll put the primary motion. All those in favour, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3. All those against? That's 12 against. That has been defeated. I now put the foreshadowed motion from moved by Councillor Hesse, seconded by Councillor Porteous. All those in favour? All those against? That has been carried with 3 against. Next item, Inner West Council draft busking policy. I'm happy to support that. Does anyone wish to second it? Seconded by Councillor Lockie. Does anyone need to speak to it?
Yes, I quickly have to speak to it.
Yes.
Have we spoken to the police about this?
I'll put that question to the officers.
Yes, during the process, Councillor, through the Chair, yes, the police and the regulatory bodies have been consulted in the development of the policy.
Did they have any concerns or did they have anything to contribute?
I'll put that question to the officers.
I'll need to take on notice the precise response from the police. I have not been notified that the police have any concerns that the officers have not taken into account in the development of the policy.
Okay, if you could do that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem.
Can I speak? I just want to move a very minor amendment that I hope can be incorporated, just that when we receive the post-exhibition report, that it addressed the issue of the exclusion of Liverpool Road from the draft busking policy, or rather that the draft busking policy stipulates that Liverpool Road is an area where busking cannot occur.
I'm happy to incorporate that. Councillor Lockie, do you have any objection to that being incorporated? If not, I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Conduct of the local government election. Councillor Passos.
Yes, I'm glad this is on the agenda. And of course, the Electoral Commission are the people to run the elections. Because people don't know the background of when council ran the elections. But I'd like to raise something, and I'd like it to have something added to this recommendation. Thank you. Could we write to the Electoral Commission or the powers that be? I find that we have too many polling booths. I find that they're totally unnecessary. We had polling booths at every church and every school many, many years ago when people walked to church and then they went to vote. Not too many people own cars. It is totally unnecessary for a number of polling booths that we have in this area. I'll take this from a candidate's perspective. It's hard to man all these polling booths and 2 and 3 entrances. What they should be looking at is disabled access, and given the vote, and given the vote at the pre-poll, how large the turnout it is, and I think the pre-poll is the way to go with the future. That's where it's going. But there are far too many polling booths that are not needed, costing a lot of money, or even the staff at those smaller ones. Some polling booths have 150 people, for God's sake. So I do believe the Electoral Commission, I've raised this previously, and I think all councillors would have to feel the same way, unless they're Labor that's got all the booth workers in the world, especially now that... No, especially now that we're delivering swimming pools everywhere. We're delivering everything for them. So there's plenty of booth workers. They're getting everything that was promised. Now, we must, this is important. It's not to say that I'm looking after myself for the next election there, but the grace of God, I mightn't wake up tomorrow morning. That's not the point. There are too many polling booths. It's people know the main ones where they are, and I don't think we need them at every school and every little backwood and everywhere else. When, as I said, look at the pre-poll. That's even taken away the need for a lot of polling booths because the high number. So I'd like councillors to support me on this. I don't think they've changed, the Electoral Commission has changed that in years and years and years. I don't even think they've ever looked at it.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm certainly happy to move the officer's recommendation, and it is good to see this being brought forward and to have the matter determined. I don't disagree with Councillor Passis's concerns. My other concern conjoined with that is the ever-expanding length of pre-poll, which is, I get that it's convenient for voters, but the reason in the first instance was meant to be for voters who were simply unable to attend on election day. And the further it expands, the more onerous it is for political activists and candidates. That's true, that's not the primary concern. But the further back from, it can become anti-democratic if people are making their decision about who they vote for. We're at 3 weeks now, what if it becomes 4 weeks or 5 weeks or 6 weeks prior to election day? Maybe a constructive way forward would be that we make this decision that we're going to go with the Electoral Commission and that we seek a meeting with them and maybe a conference with elected councillors to discuss some of these sort of practical issues. We have more experience on how these things are conducted well and democratically than anybody else. And I think that would be a useful meeting to convene. So I might propose a minor amendment in line with Councillor Passis's suggestion that we adopt the officer's recommendation to contract the Electoral Commission to conduct the election and that we seek a meeting with the Electoral Commission in order to... of interested councillors in order to plan the conduct of the election or discuss it. So I'll provide that wording to the minute taker. Councillor McKenna has agreed to second the motion. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor? No? Any further amendments?
Can I just speak briefly? I'm not sure why.
I'm more than happy for you to replace me as the mover, Councillor Passis.
No. You're on a roll, son. Keep going.
Councillor Kiat.
I just want to put on the record that I don't share the concern about too many polling booths, and I think it's useful to, for them to be close to where people live and be able to walk to. And yes, I'm just saying that in case I'm not able to make it to this meeting, because I think it would be a shame if we reduce the number of polling booths. And I know that the larger polling booths have large lines, and I think also that's just not fair for people who turn up to vote and don't expect to wait half an hour to do so. So more booths would actually reduce that wait.
Okay, thank you for that. Any further amendments? Councillor Stamoulis. I'll call the meeting to order. Councillor Stamoulis has the floor.
Just very quickly, I concur with comments made about the number of polling booths. It places a lot of stress on every political party and independents, and particularly when you're out there for a lengthy day from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. And now we've added an additional Saturday into that process as well. And that creates a lot of stress, I think, on all of us. We can all find the people, we all do, I see that, but it certainly it creates an extra burden on us. And I think Councillor Passis has also mentioned another very important thing. Some of those booths have very, very low numbers in attendance. And again, they have to be manned, and we have to resource those as well. Additionally, one of the other concerns too is I noticed, I've got some older people in my camp, as the rest of you do, and some of those days out there were extremely cold. They didn't have any shelter, and there was no ability for them to move into an area that was probably a bit more practical for them. And I'm glad that none of them ended up with the flu or anything else out of that process. But I'd like to look after my people on my campaign, and I'm sure that the rest of you would like to look after the people on your campaign in terms of the burden and that. So I think these are worthy amendments.
Okay.
Thank you.
I might ask, is there anyone who wants to speak against the motion or to amend it? Because I don't think we need another speech in support. If not, I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. What was previously item 12, now becoming item 6, second quarter budget review.
Mayor, may I move this?
Yes.
And thank the officers. I think, as has been alluded to a few times tonight, a proper reading of the quarterly budget review is quite a sobering experience. There's not a lot of great news in it, apart from the property service review that has delivered us $1.1 million, or will deliver us $1.1 million. And I'd like to place on record my thanks to the officers who have driven that process and achieved that outcome. I note there are a number of other comings and goings that have been reported, but I shall leave it there and pick up matters in my right of reply.
Is there a seconder for the motion? Seconded by Councillor Lockie. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor? Any further, is there any amendments or anyone who wishes to speak against it? Councillor Passos. Yes?
Yeah, page 64, would this be to Mr. Where are we there? Where am I? Page 624, I mean. At the bottom it's got decreased capital expenditure. Upgrade work for the following projects have been deferred to future year. Telstra site, library, Don Fraser Boom, Town Hall, on and on. What does the increased cost of the actual aquatic centre redevelopment, 346K, mean?
I'll put that question to the Chief Financial Officer.
Through the Chair, the budget hasn't changed. All we're doing is shifting when those costs are actually being paid between the different financial years. So we've brought it forward from next year into this year because those costs are going to be paid this year.
Councillor Passos.
Increased cost of actual aquatic centre, I think that should be worded differently because it comes across like costs have increased 346,000.
You need to read the whole sentence. That's the problem.
The whole sentence says increased cost of actual aquatic centre development. That's the whole sentence. Thank you very much.
Councillor Passos. Councillor Passos.
Thank you.
Okay, there being no further discussion, I'll go to Councillor Drury for his right of reply. Okay, I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Item 7, investment report. Councillor Drury, yes?
May I move this report? Councillor Passos, when you finally read all of the papers, I shall listen to you a little more.
Okay, Councillor.
Yes, as you are obliged to do.
Okay, I'm going to adjourn the meeting for a period of 2 minutes. The meeting is adjourned.
For my intemperateness. Once again, I wish to thank the officers for this report, and once again, I want to note the very low amount of our investment that is in fossil fuel lending ADIs. This is a major achievement for this council. And I'd particularly like to thank Michael for the work that he has done on this. I've got to say, I'm a little surprised that some of the other more sanctimonious councils in this state can't emulate this.
I'll second that. And just... I'll second that and add my congratulations to Michael and his team. Fantastic. We're at 98% non-fossil fuel and including 23% socially responsible investments. And as Councillor De Cruz pointed out to me, our non-fossil fuel ADIs are performing better than our fossil fuel ADIs. So that's also fantastic.
Item 8, what was item 14, now becoming item 8, notice of motion, disability employment.
The reason I raised this motion is years ago when I was first elected to council, council hired a young girl that lived in Summerhill with a disability, intellectual disability, and they've since moved out of the area, but no one would know how happy that made her parents and how she came out of her shell. I heard they're living out west at the moment on a little farm. But since the girl was employed at the council, she was employed for about 9 months. I knew her from when she was a baby, and it was unreal how outgoing she was and how she would talk to all the residents. She'd be down on the old one-stop counter. She'd go and help in the library. She was all around the council. She became a little mascot. And then I've been shopping in Woolworths lately, and they also have a young girl there that takes a trolley around and returns items to the shelves that people have left all over the supermarket. She's another lovely young girl that says hello to everybody. I often talk to her. Now, there are disabilities and disabilities. The report here says some people don't identify with having a disability. But the disability I'm talking about is if we can help our community and our ratepayers' children where they're close to home, where the parents can call up and see if they're okay while they're doing their shopping, we should be looking at this. I'm pretty sure that we've got a lot of young people in the area that can sit down and do what I've witnessed some of our poor staff doing, is stuffing paper into envelopes. And I'm pretty sure we've got a role for at least, in this large council area, for at least half a dozen people that are disadvantaged. From what I've seen of our staff, they're very friendly, they're very outgoing, and I know the staff would look out for them. And I know they would feel comfortable in the council environment. So maybe my motion wasn't clear. I'm not saying that this council's been lax in not hiring people with disabilities and having a policy. I'm saying I would like this council to go one step further, and if our community services can go out with the places that they visit in their community centres and advertise the fact that we will have positions for maybe half a dozen young men or women that are sitting at home or attending type of sheltered workshops, that we can find a place for them. It doesn't have to be full-time. Something can be worked out. But I'll tell you what, councillors, if that happens and if you notice that those kids around the area, around the council chambers and around the offices, you will feel very, very good about it. So I would like to go further I want to thank the officers for this report and all the stats, but the stats are not addressing what the motion was supposed to address. I would like the council to go out and recruit or advertise the fact that we are open for these young people to apply and we have positions for them.
Okay, so Councillor, how are you seeking to amend your motion?
Well, I'd like to go further. I'm saying the officers have given a good report, but it's not exactly what I meant in my motion.
No, but if your motion is adopted and I'll be supporting it, then there'll be a more detailed report will be required to be brought back to council.
I would like a detailed report on employing at least half a dozen of our young residents who have intellectual disabilities.
Okay.
It's not a matter of physical.
Okay.
It's the ones that we can talk to, the ones that we can help bring
No,
out of the shell.
I understand. So the motion currently reads that council receive a report back on how many staff have disabilities which are employed under the Inclusion Action Plan, and it needs to be amended to include on increasing the number of people with disabilities which are employed.
Intellectual, yeah.
Okay.
Disabilities.
Is there a seconder for the motion? Seconded by Councillor Stamos. Is there anyone who wishes to speak against the motion? Right.
Look, I can't.
Okay, sorry, no, I'll go to Councillor Stamoulis first as the seconder. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor? Great. Councillor Porteous?
Yeah, look, I work in the disability sector, and I guess it would be, I think, very useful for us to actually have an update on how the Inclusion Action Plan is actually being progressed through council, because I think that's where we might get a better indication about where we might be able to make further improvements. I'd be particularly interested to know in terms of not just our internal staff, which of course is really important, but also how we're reaching out to the community, because I mean,
that's not part of
approximately
what I'm talking about.
20%.
Councillor Porteous.
Approximately 20% of the Australian population has a disability of one sort or another, which is absolutely enormous, I know, but in fact about 20%, that's almost a fifth of the population, have some sort of disability. It's very, very common. I actually work in the intellectual disability sector, and again, there's over 100,000 people who identify as having an intellectual disability just in New South Wales, well over 500,000 in Australia. Again, it's not just the work that council does internally, but also the work that council does externally, which I think would be really useful for councils to have a better understanding about how we are approaching that through our Disability Inclusion Action Plan. So could I ask that Councillor Passis add an amendment that is that we also get a report back on the Disability Inclusion Action Plan of council and where that is currently at.
No, Councillor Porteous, I won't support that. You can put that up as way of motion.
Okay, well, that's an amendment then.
You could bring that up.
Well, you could address this in your right of reply, Councillor.
Yeah, okay,
I'll move it as a separate amendment.
Okay, so that's an amendment from Councillor Porteous, which I'll ask her to provide to the minute taker, and if we could just scroll down so that everybody can see that amendment as well. Now, councillors, I want to keep things moving. We don't need to be here till 11 o'clock at night, so sounds like there's furious agreement on the need for this report. Is there anyone else who wishes to amend the recommendation further? Aye. If not, I will wait to hear from Councillor Porteous about the wording of her amendment.
Will I close it?
I'll just wait till she's got the wording of the amendment. Okay. Councillor Pass, if you wish to make your right of reply now, you can.
The reason I won't accept it is motions get put up in this council and it gets lost when other councillors come in on it and add their wish list. Councillor Porteous knows that she can put a notice of motion up for what she wants and her concerns. I would like her support on this. This is to move as soon as possible, and let's do something in one area that I have raised. What you are bringing up, yes, it needs to be brought up at another time by way of motion for you and ask for exactly what you want. I think our staff are inundated with reports. Maybe you could contact the staff in business hours and find out exactly what's going on there. That wasn't the reason for my motion. The reason for my motion was, let's employ some kids with intellectual disabilities as soon as possible. Maybe the organisation where you work, if they're in the inner west, they can nominate somebody. That is the reason I put this up, not for this to be lost in reports. When I put motions up, I sincerely believe in what I'm putting up, and I like to see results from them, not games or reports.
Okay, is the manager of HR still here? Right. I'm pretty certain that in a previous resolution of the council that an update on the inclusion action plan has been required, and we haven't received that. But anyway, I mean, I can't confirm that because she's not in attendance. Right, so different. Okay, no problem. Is there a seconder for the Porteous amendment? Seconded by Councillor Kiat. I'll put Councillor Porteous's amendment. All those in favour? All those against? That has been carried. That's incorporated into Councillor Passis's primary motion. I'll put the Passis-Stamoulis motion. All those in favour? All those against? That has been carried. Next item, Council advertising. Councillor Passis.
Yes. First of all, I would like to know the officer who wrote this report. Who was the officer who wrote this report?
Point of order.
I'll put that question to the General Manager.
It was the Group Manager of Communications, Laura.
Okay. Well, I tried to the best of my ability to respect staff, and I expect it in return. And I feel the last line of page 661 is not really appropriate for staff, and I do not believe that a few of the claims in the notice of motion are incorrect on the above. It's correct to what I know. It's correct to what people I speak to. Smirk as much as you like, Councillor Kiat, it shows your age. It is correct to the people I talk to. It is correct.
Point of order. I know it's a little bit late, but I do think that derogatory comment that Councillor Passis just made towards Councillor Kiat needs to. No, but I think that needs to be withdrawn. That's really inappropriate.
I won't withdraw it. Smirking when I'm speaking is also rude and derogatory.
Okay, councillors, we're almost at the end of the business on the agenda. I'm going to ask Councillor Passis to refrain from making any comments about Councillor Kiat and to proceed with the motion.
Now, we do not get what we're paying for with the courier. This is not a witch hunt after the local paper. We only have one paper. What I'm talking about is go back and renegotiate. Renegotiate a deal that is not costing the ratepayers so much. It's just over the top of $500,000 just so we can look at Darcy Byrne's photo every week. Buy a photo with your daddy love with her and put it on the wall at home. Because that's all that's really happening.
Point of order, I understand some residents have done that.
Have they? Now, we know the regulations.
Point of order, that's not a point of order.
Councillor Passis has the floor.
We know under the Act that we have to advertise our DAs. We know we have to put advertisements in for tenders and that. Information to residents, we need to get it out. It's not getting out to the residents. Now, to say that staff members receive it, didn't say where they receive it from. First of all, we used to have them delivered and stop going to homes. Then they were delivered bunches to the service stations and the paper shops. That's not happening now. And it's not free online. Residents have to pay for it. Now, we've had 2 leaflets go out within a couple of weeks, costing thousands of dollars. That one from the Mayor, which is grossly incorrect, and that would be brought up at another date, the information, grossly incorrect. And we had one to And yet at the bottom here it says, the approval of newsletter is considered an operational matter for staff to determine and not councillors. Well, I think the draft should come to councillors. We know the area, we know the residents, we know what they want to know about, and if it did come to councillors in a draft form, we could have picked up on the mistakes. I am not here to go after the staff, but these comments are unacceptable. They're not right. We are paying too much. And one more question I have.
Councillor, your time.
Extension, please. It's got, I beg your pardon.
Councillor Passis, your time has expired. Will someone move an extension of time? I'm happy to move that way. Seconded by Councillor De Cruz for a period of 1 minute. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Please proceed.
Another comment I do not like. We estimate the cost of staff time investigating and writing a report would be approximately $2,000. Now, hang on. Are we going out for a consultant to write this report? Staff are getting paid for their time. Why is there a $2,000 figure in there? And I don't think it's a lot to negotiate the deal with the courier. I think it's totally wrong. We're paying staff their own wages, and to say it's going to cost, and I've noticed that's very selective in a lot of these reports that come to council, what it costs the council and the times it does it. $2,000, for God's sake, they're sitting there at the desk.
Okay, thank you for that. I'd like to speak in support of amending the motion. I think the substantive issue about $500,000 of public money being spent on one publication, which has a monopoly over the local news market in the inner west, is a very legitimate issue to raise. And I think reviewing how effectively that's being spent and whether there's better ways to spend that money or to reduce the expenditure is sensible. I don't think we can support abandoning all advertising in the Courier as referred to in point 1 in the first instance. I think consideration of reducing or transferring that money elsewhere could be considered in the report and should be. So I'd like to propose to Councillor Passis that a small amendment, either that we deal with the items separately, the review should be conducted, the substantive issues that have been raised should be considered, all options should be on the table, including reducing the expenditure on that publication, but not, I'm proposing that we not agree to abandon it in the first instance tonight in its entirety.
Under the Act, we must advertise certain things.
Yeah.
We cannot abandon all of it. I've said that.
Yeah. So, no, I understand that. So I'll propose an amendment that, which I'll give to the minute takers, which is essentially that the reduction in the expenditure on the Courier, aside from the statutory requirements, be considered as part of the review, but not that we commit to doing so tonight. Okay, that's incorporated. I'll liaise with the minute takers. Councillor Kiat.
I intended to move a foreshadowed motion to a similar effect. I thank Councillor Passis for raising this issue, and I was interested to find out that we do spend $500,000 per year on the Courier and no other papers. So yes, and I think the amendment that's being proposed is sensible. I won't support abandoning all advertising apart from statutorily required notices at this time. And I think that the review should include looking at a diversity of advertising spent amongst various news publications. I think also we need to think about the cost and benefit of direct mail versus advertising. I'd like some analysis of that. I would assume that it is a lot cheaper to advertise than to direct mail, but I think in some instances, obviously, direct mail is more effective. So depending on the wording of the amendment, perhaps a foreshadowed motion is not required.
Yeah, I think it's not required, and the primary motion has now been amended to reflect that, so that council review all advertising in the Courier, etc., and all aspects of our advertising and public notices, etc. So I think they're substantively the same motion. Councillor Stamoulis.
Mr Mayor, fellow councillors, I would also like to find out how many residents are using our website and promote our website more and more to facilitate advertising, whether it be events, whether it be DAs, and I would like to capture some of that data, because in fact we might find that today more people are using the website for communication and access to what council is doing than they are reading whatever publication it might be. I'm not specifying anyone in particular, but we might be capturing far more using our own sources, our own material, which Councillor Passis is alluding to. So I would like to propose an amendment that we build into this report an analysis of our own website statistics to facilitate what sort of capture we're getting of our local community. Thank you.
Okay, I'll leave it with Councillor Passis to consider that amendment. Councillor De Cruz. Councillor De Cruz, then Councillor Locke.
Sorry, I was actually going to refine along the same lines, because I think we actually need to review all our aspects of communication, including advertising. So it's the websites, the newsletter, the whole lot. And in fact, even the flyers that go in our rate notices, etc. So I'd like to have review all aspects of our communications, including advertising and public notices.
Well, I'm not sure how that substantially differs from point 2 of the primary motion. Councillor De Cruz?
I think it's the issue of the website, and the newsletter's not actually mentioned in there.
Yep, sure. The website, which is an amendment from Councillor Stamoulis, and which I think Councillor Passis has agreed to incorporate.
All aspects of our notification.
Yeah.
The newsletter's in part 1, but not in part 2, and we're voting on them separately.
No, we're not voting on them separately. Okay. Councillor Lockie.
Yeah, just a couple of... I've got a question first in relation to point 1, with the comment here that the draft newsletter be approved by councillors prior to distribution. Are we proposing that go ahead, or is that going to be part of a review?
Part of the review, if you read the primary motion, the amended primary motion.
No, I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
That'd be a fun process, 15 people editing it.
Wouldn't it? I think we've had some good proof tonight about how well that would work out.
I choose not to be on that panel.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I do support, as somebody who works in this industry, I do support the officer's comments on that. I think that could very quickly descend into a dog's breakfast, and we would like you to get one newsletter out every term if everybody had to approve the wording on that. I think that's fraught with difficulty, and I hope the report addresses that. The only other comment I would make is in relation to the statistics that are being requested on the website. I would add that council has just done a pretty major shift with its website that is going to almost certainly affect all the analytics on it. So all the URLs have changed and so forth. So I would expect that was, it might be a little bit too early to try and get an analysis of the website, given we have made some pretty major changes to the structure and the addresses of that website. So you may find as well, I can imagine our group manager would address this in her report, but that may not be a very useful analysis at that stage. The normal course of events would be that you would wait about 6 to 12 months unless something was seriously tanking.
Now, Councillor, is there anyone else who wishes to? Councillor McKenna.
Just quickly, in relation to the quarterly newsletter, the officers clearly states here that it's an operational matter, the quarterly newsletter. I've actually lived through a period where newsletters were seen by councillors prior to distribution or prior to the finalisation, and it's a nightmare. Don't want to go there.
Okay. Is there anyone who wishes to move a further amendment?
Just as a point of order, can
Yes.
I just clarify I've withdrawn my foreshadowed motion?
Yes, no problem. Councillor
Can I
Porteous.
actually clarify what it is we're voting on? Because what I'm seeing before me is that we've still got point 1 in there, which has got that the draft newsletter be approved by councillors prior to distribution. Is that been amended, or?
That is currently in the primary motion to be a subject of the review. That could be amended to be deleted, but it hasn't been at this point.
Then I'll move that amendment to delete the wording about the draft newsletter be approved by councillors prior to distribution.
Okay, so that's an amendment moved by Councillor Lockie, presumably seconded by Councillor Porteous, who doesn't need to speak to it. Any other substantive amendments before I go to Councillor Passos for her right of reply? Councillor Passos.
Look, it's really sad because when somebody doesn't like me, they don't like the good initiatives I put up. It's really sad and it really shows the character of people. After the election, a quarterly newsletter went out, the first quarterly newsletter went out, and I was the only councillor that raised that the councillors weren't on it, or their contact numbers. And don't you believe after the election, a new council, that all the councillors should be in that newsletter with their contacts? A few councillors agreed with me, the others were happy it happened, but didn't like to say thank you for raising it. We've got things in this newsletter that residents are not interested in. And each councillor must have residents come to them with issues, and not just one resident. You will start to get a pattern. Somebody keeps raising this, people keep raising this issue to me. Maybe we should be putting that in the newsletter. We're not saying that we write the newsletter. The draft comes to us. It could be fantastic. I raised a motion last term on council about telling people to be wary on second and third floors of units of the safety of their children falling out of windows. That was supposed to go in the paper every couple of months. It didn't. Those updates could be in this to highlight to the people, remember, of children falling out of high-rise windows and other safety things. They don't have to take it on board. And the spelling mistakes and repeating themselves in certain articles, we could pick up on that. I've also worked in the print media. So, and I was a proofreader years ago. You can pick these up straight away. No one's infallible. Some councillor could come with something that's really important that can go in the newsletter for the good of the residents. So it's not as if I'm saying that the staff cannot do their work. It is supporting the staff to get the best product out there that we are paying good money for.
Okay, thank you for that. So, Councillor Passos, can I just get confirmation? You've incorporated Councillor Stamoulis's amendment. Are you opposed to the incorporation of the amendment from Councillor Lockyer and Councillor Porteous?
What were they?
That words "and council expand on its quarterly newsletter that is hand-delivered and that the draft newsletter be approved by councillors prior to distribution in point 1 be deleted." Is that your intention, or was it just about the councillors editing it?
It was primarily about the councillors editing it, but the expanding on the quarterly newsletter, doesn't it already go to every household?
I don't think
How many more households can it go to?
I think the intention is that if you reduce, tell me if I'm right, if you reduce the amount you spend on the courier, you could do it more than quarterly.
Right. Okay, if that's the case.
That's a substantive amendment.
Okay, well in that case, yes, I'll amend that. So I'm happy for the council expand on its quarterly newsletter to be part of a review.
It's just that.
Yep, to be part of a review, as long as it's not.
By councillors prior to distribution. That's the deletion.
Yes. Okay.
Could I just clarify though that that's a review of expanding the quarterly newsletter? It's not an instruction to staff to expand.
Yes, as is quite clear if you read the motion.
Doesn't read that way.
That council review, etc. It's absolutely clear. Okay, do you wish to incorporate the amendment? Okay, Councillor Lockyer's amendment is incorporated, so that has been deleted. I'll now put the primary motion. I don't think there's any further amendments. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Stamoulis. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Next item, reversing Inner West bus privatisation. Councillor Kiat.
Councillors, I think this is fairly straightforward. In last year, or 2 years ago now, in October 2017, we resolved to oppose the privatisation of the buses in the Inner West. And now, hopefully, we are on the cusp of a new government. That's my sincere hope. And I think it's timely to reiterate our view that the privatisation of the bus services in this area are not supported by the council or by the residents, that there are serious concerns about lack of democratic control over services and cost, and that we'd like to see them returned to public hands. I'd say that this is, I know that this is something that's supported by most of the councillors here, and I think that by putting this to our state counterparts, we'll strengthen the case for that to actually occur if there is a change of government.
Listen, what's the bit?
Articulate that in their reply and their commitment if they so choose. I don't wish to verbal them about it. I'm not entirely clear on exactly what the opposition's position is on that, other than opposition to the privatisation. So I'm happy to support the substantive amendment. I agree it would be good to get all these people on the record, but I'd ask Councillor Kiat to agree to delete that. And if not, I'll move that as an amendment. Councillors, further discussion? Councillor Macri.
Chair, I can't support this motion, basically because the people that I've spoken to are actually happy with the changes. They found the service more efficient and meeting their needs, and public transport has actually improved with this process. So I can't support it because the community hasn't asked me to.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in opposition to it or to amend the motion? If not, I'll go to Councillor Kiat for his right of reply. I'll just seek confirmation about whether there's a seconder for the motion. Seconded by Councillor Porteous. Councillor Kiat.
I'll accept the proposed amendment.
Okay, that's incorporated. Do you wish to make a right of reply? No need. I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried with Councillors Macri and Passis against. Next item.
Slightly more substantial and require some explanation.
Yep.
Councillors who were at the briefing last year regarding the land and property strategy initiatives will recall that we discussed this particular site, which is council property. It's on Illawarra Road in Marrickville, and it's a house, and I understand that it was acquired for the purposes of some DCP change or some work that did not eventuate, and now the property is available for our disposal or use. I think that it would be useful for us to receive a report on whether this house can be used as a house, because if we don't investigate this option, it won't happen. And I'm not saying that the report will recommend that it should happen or that all councillors will agree that it should happen, but I think it's something that we should look into. When we have a house that's available for use, we can either decide to sell it or we can decide to use it as council affordable housing. And that is consistent with our affordable housing policy, Part 2.6 of which says, we'll seek to enter into affordable housing development and management partnerships with relevant community housing providers and or the private sector to ensure that opportunities for the efficient use of any resources redeployed by council, for example, lots or housing dedicated to affordable housing from council-owned or other public land. And of course, council will ensure proper management through entering into an MOU or another legal instrument with a community housing provider. So what I'm asking is that we get a report where our officers can start investigating, talking to a community housing provider. We do have an affordable housing officer who probably would be able to do this and have the relationships to be able to at least give us some indication of whether this is possible. And crucially, whether there's funding available for this. We know that some community housing providers are willing to enter into partnerships with us if we have property where they'll fund the necessary works that need to be done to the house so that it can be used. And the staff have indicated that some work would need to be done. So I think that I think it would be worth finding out whether we can obtain that funding. I think it would be good to try and work with an Aboriginal community housing provider. There are many. I don't claim to be an expert on it, and I hope that our specialist staff can produce a useful report.
A seconder for the motion? Seconded by Councillor Porteous. Do you need to speak to it?
Look, just briefly, I think it's incredibly important that all of our property assets are used for the best purpose, and there could be no better purpose than providing more affordable housing, and particularly to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in our LGA. So I think in terms of the highest priorities that we would want to achieve as councillors, and using our assets in the best possible way that we can, this is certainly something that I think all progressive councillors should be supporting.
Okay, I wish to speak briefly against the motion. And I want to take that issue on directly about whether that is the best use of this resource, this asset. The fact is that providing affordable housing for one tenant or even a family of tenants with an asset that is worth, let's call it $1 million, it's probably more to council, is an incredibly poor dividend. It's an incredibly small social justice outcome for an asset that is worth a lot and could be used for a variety of purposes. To put it another way, if you sold that asset off and gave the family a cheque for $1.5 million, they're in a home forever. Now, obviously, we would never do that. But I don't accept that the definition of your commitment to affordable housing is whether you're willing to use any property that becomes available to provide low-cost housing to tenants. We are not Housing New South Wales. We're not the federal government. We're not the New South Wales government. Our ability to address the substantial housing affordability issues in the inner west by picking off individual properties and saying we're going to pick someone out of a lottery and give them a present it's minuscule. It's a drop in the ocean. We'd be much better off, I'm not saying I'm proposing this, but we'd be much better off selling off all of those individual properties and pooling the resources together for an affordable housing fund. And we've been through this argument before in relation to the derelict cottages at Leichhardt. We've now expanded the car park, but that was the argument that was made by various councillors for many years. No, this is affordable housing. It's actually not a good affordable housing dividend to target our assets in that way. And if people are committed to, and I don't doubt that they are, committed to getting a change in affordable housing outcomes, well, we need to come up with a much more sophisticated approach than just picking out properties here and there and saying, let's rent it out to someone who we think is worthy. So I will oppose the motion. Councillor Drury?
I'll likewise oppose the motion. I think the critical point in terms of our housing affordability policy is for us to seek affordable housing from developers who wish to build in our community. I think that's something that we can usefully do. I think that it's something that our community expects us and wants us to do. I don't think picking off one house here, there and everywhere is the way to move forward in terms of affordable housing. We have a pretty clear policy that goes to looking at the question of developing our community and getting a dividend that we use for affordable housing. I'm comfortable with that approach. Picking off the odd property here, there and everywhere, I'm not.
Thank you for that. Councillor Passos?
I don't think people are listening to what is happening with the budget with this council. We cannot afford to maintain and service the assets we have. How long do you think it'll be before when this property is renovated for a family and when it's going to be in need of repair? We cannot repair what we have now. And I find it very interesting that all I've heard from the Green State campaign is pill testing and the punch-ups within the party. They've never ever come up with a policy for the low-income earners, never ever brought a thing out, not a bit interested in it. but expecting council and ratepayers to fund housing for people. The very people that they profess to be so upset about and can't wait to march and cause trouble with. They haven't come up with an idea. They haven't come up with a policy. It's always putting it onto other people. We cannot maintain what we have now. So the quicker that this bleeding heart hypocrisy stops at this council, the better. We've got a house in Asheville that's going to be demolished that should have been a women's refuge. But this council didn't want to do it. Get the state government to buy it off us. But they're making a pocket park that will, in the future, the people will ask for a lighting, a toilet, a fence, and then playground equipment, where we should be selling it.
Councillors, further discussion? I'll go to Councillor Iskander and then Councillor Stamoulis.
I would like to thank Councillor Kian for putting this, something very, very important always, to look for opportunities to support these advantaged people, especially the Aboriginals. Unfortunately, we can't do it for different reasons, and if there is any chance to support you with this, I would be standing and support you for it. It doesn't mean that's the end of it. It means we have to follow new policy and keep improving our policies to get to the stage where we can really help disadvantaged people with homes and other services, and the Aboriginals and
Sorry, I didn't want to adjourn the meeting. Councillor Stamoulis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll be supporting that we do receive a report on this. I think it's worthwhile for councillors to consider a property such as this, to have a good solid report done, simply to have some information and knowledge. And that's all we're asking for at this moment, I believe, and I think that's an appropriate thing to do. I would like to ask a question to the relevant officer.
Yes.
About this concept of dividend, what that means and how the report might address that. Thank you.
I'm not sure that that's... What are you referring to, Councillor?
But we've had two councillors so far discuss this issue about, do we get the dividend back or the return back or the benefit of investment or whatever it is for this property specifically. I didn't know that was sort of a strong criteria of the affordable housing policy, but obviously...
I'm not sure I can put a question to an officer about a political argument that has been made by a councillor. If you're posing it to me as the chair, my definition of dividend is not just financial, but how many people it actually benefits.
Fair enough.
There's the definition for you.
Okay.
Move the motion be put.
Councillor Macri.
Move the motion.
Okay. Councillor Drury has moved that the motion be put. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor McKenna. I'll put that. All those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That has been 10. That has been defeated. Councillor Macri.
Chair, as probably one of the only councillors here that has acute knowledge of this property, and I don't think it's a good outcome when councillors just see something, and I understand that they have this desire to find out about a property, but this property was originally purposed for the widening of Toohey Lane, and the people of Petersham Road and the people that live all around there have been waiting a long time for this. Now, I understand that it was moved out of the road reservation at the last LEP, but the people still are demanding it because Toohey Lane is the entrance to Maryville's largest car park, which is on top of Banana Joe's. It is also the entrance for the two largest developments thus far in Marrickville, and they use that. And there's only one lane to get out of Toohey Lane. So what happens is, when there's vehicles coming down, traffic backs up on Illawarra Road, it causes traffic chaos. The issue is that this property has another property next to it. So there was supposed to be a continuation of the lane and get the double lane access out onto Illawarra Road. And I think it's imperative that it be reinstated and retained for that, because it leads to the orderly development of the area. It goes into safety, because Illawarra Road is a shared zone, and we can't have people trying to jump in where people are on bikes trying to knock them. They get knocked off because people have got anxiety about zipping up this street when there's no car coming the other way. So it's imperative that we develop that, we actually get that connection going for the people, because every Saturday, every day, there's chaos on Petersham Road. People wait 15 minutes to get out of their driveway on Petersham Road. So I don't support the motion, and probably councillors should just walk down there, have a look on Saturday morning what goes on there in any other given day, and knock on some doors of the residents on Petersham Road, and they will tell you what it is. So I don't want to send the staff on a wild goose chase, that's all.
Okay, thank you for that. Any further discussion, councillors? If not, I'll go to Councillor Kiat for his right of reply.
I'm disappointed, obviously, that the Labor councillors won't be supporting this. I think that it's a missed opportunity to get some information which could lead to a great opportunity to really make a difference in our community, and we know that our community is demanding more public affordable housing. I just want to try and address some of the points that were raised, and I don't think I'm going to sway any votes. I hope I can, but I think it's informative nonetheless, because I feel like this debate is going in circles, and I think that we need to really have a look at what our policy is and what we can achieve with these kinds of properties. So the idea that this is some ad hoc approach to an affordable housing strategy is just incorrect. It's right there in our affordable housing policy that we will use our resources. For example, lots of housing dedicated to affordable housing from council-owned or other public land. That's right there in our policy. And I've put that there in the background. I mean, the suggestion that this is ad hoc is just incorrect. It's in fact entirely consistent with our policy. It's not our entire policy. It's consistent with our policy. It's one of the ways to increase our affordable housing stock. Now, I mean, to say that it's a drop in the ocean, well, it's actually changing someone's life. We know that the public housing waiting list in this state is 60,000 plus. I have friends who I think need to go on the public waiting list now, who are, you know, in their 20s, because I know that they'll need it. And we need more public housing in this state, and where we can contribute, I think we should. Now, the idea that that we should sell this and give a check to a family in need. I mean, it was Thatcher who, in the UK, gave council housing tenants the right to buy. That led to the destruction of council housing in the UK. It's not a good policy. A good policy is public housing where a good policy is public housing held by public authorities and rented out at affordable rates. And that goes to the issue of the revenue here and the issue of maintenance. Now, we have many affordable housing units that we have obtained through developers and otherwise, and they are income-generating assets in perpetuity. So this is a good investment.
Okay, thank you. I'll now put the motion.
Sorry, I've got 20 seconds left.
Oh, sorry, I thought you concluded.
The idea that this would be determined by lottery is just undermining the way that our public housing system works. Okay, we engage with an MOU or a legal instrument with a community housing provider so that they can determine a family that's in need, and I'm very sorry that we'll deny them even looking into that opportunity.
Okay, I'll put that. All those in favour, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That is a tie. I'll use my casting vote to vote against it. That has been defeated. Next item, also from Councillor Kiat, in relation to bringing forward the review of rates. Councillor Kiat, can I ask that the Chief Financial Officer be in attendance? Supplementary item from the previous meeting. We've dealt with that. Councillor Kiat. That Council write to the Minister for Local Government and her ALP and Greens counterparts requesting that they publicly commit to A, supporting legislative changes during the next term of government that would allow councils to develop their own progressive rate system, and B, supporting the immediate release of the IPART report into rating reform, which was delivered to the Minister in December 2016.
I think this is something that I hope that we can all support. We know that councils are structurally in a pretty tough financial position with the rate peg, and I think also it would be important to look into the possibility of councils structuring their rates to be more progressive. We all accept that progressive income tax is the best way to raise income tax and revenue because it places the burden of revenue raising on those who can afford it most. That is not the case for rates, where for one thing, we often have base rates or minimum rates, which mean that a flat tax is applied, or in other cases, we have a pro rata rate that applies to all properties, no matter the value. So a $15 million house pays the same pro rata rate as a $500,000 house. Now, I don't think that's a fair or just way to raise council revenue, and I think if we want to look at increasing the amount of revenue we raise, we need to look into the possibility of a progressive rate system where those houses, say over $5 million, for every dollar over $5 million they're worth, they pay a higher rate than is paid for houses with values less than that. So it's really just applying the principle of progressive taxation, which we all accept in income tax, to our rate system, so that the poorest in our community are not the ones who are footing the bill when we're making changes to our rating system.
Can I just ask a question, pose a question to you, Councillor, and a question to the Chief Financial Officer? So, in relation to point A, yes, supporting legislative changes during the next term of government that will allow councils to develop their own progressive rate system, that is allowed for under the existing rating system, not during this term because rates are frozen. So, at the conclusion of this term, there will be a policy decision, or in the next term, there will be a policy decision for the newly elected council about what rating system to have. And there are more regressive and more progressive options available to councils, and a vast array of pieces in between. So that doesn't require legislating a change. A lot of legislation do.
To be clear, yeah, so I did have some discussion with the Chief Financial Officer about this. There are more progressive ways within the existing legislation to set the rates. So I think base rates are an example of a regressive way of setting the rates. However, the ability to charge different rates to different property values is not available under the Local Government Act, and that would require a legislative change.
Okay, thank you for that. I've got that clarification. And I'll just ask the Chief Financial Officer before I go to the councillors about what process is envisaged for informing councillors about the options for harmonising rates in the future.
Through the Chair, councillors, what we're looking at is bringing in some consultants, third-party consultants, to sit down and brief you on the options available to council to choose their rating structure. That will go through an extensive exercise of what's available, what type of rate structure you can do, and we are limited. And I'll keep this brief. I won't go too long because I can talk about this all night, and I won't. But there will be a number of briefing sessions which talk through what we can do, we'll model, and we'll get a third party to sit down with you to work out what your rating structure will be post July 2020.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Passos, then Councillor McKenna.
Look, I cannot understand where this motion's going. Again, envy. You're looking at charging people rates on how much their property's worth. You have people living in properties that, if they were sold, are worth a lot of money. But these people don't have money. But they're used to the area. They don't want to move. They're near their doctor. They're near their They're near their family. So because your house is worth $3 million, and there's not too many properties in the inner west that is not past the million mark. So it might work if you want to go out to Mount Druitt or out that way. It's not going to work here. I think you ran for the wrong council. I don't think you know the electorate. I don't think you know what's out there. I don't think you know property values. You've got people in Haberfield in houses worth $3 and $4 million that are standing in line on pension day waiting to receive their pension. They don't want to move. They've been here 30, 40, 50 years. What are you trying to do, divide the community? This is absolutely ridiculous. A person in a $5 million house and a person in a $250,000 unit both have their garbage picked up. No one gets any more or any less than the next person. I just can't believe these time-wasting and, I have to say, idiotic motions that are put to council. You want to run for state or federal and change the laws, and the act, run for it.
Okay, Councillor Passos has concluded. Councillor Drury?
What do you call the people in Parliament? What do you call the clowns?
Okay, councillors.
Listen to this holier than thou. My God, there he is.
I can adjourn.
Point of order.
I can adjourn the meeting, Councillor Passos. Councillor Passos, I can adjourn the meeting if you like. We're on the last item, so I'd prefer not to. Yeah, well, I'm sorry, he's moved a point of order and suggested that it might be inappropriate to refer to a fellow councillor's motion as idiotic, which is fair enough. You've concluded your remarks. You've followed Councillor Drury's point of order with a tirade of abuse against him, including his physical description. Let's just leave it. Let's move on. Councillor Macri.
He calls the people in Parliament clowns. What's the difference?
Chair, I find it difficult to support this motion because basically, where does it come from? We're asking the government to do something. Have we consulted our residents if that's what they want? Surely we would want to consult the residents before we move this way because they'll have considerable impact to a lot of them. I don't think we should be jumping the gun. You want to actually go. I want you to actually amend your motion, Councillor Kiat, to go and talk to the community, consult the community. If they're happy to go for a more progressive rate system and do exactly what you say, and then once we get the answer from the community, then say, let's write to the Minister. Because I think it's a bit presumptuous saying that we think that's what the community wants unless we actually speak to them first. Because there will be some severe impacts for people in this, and Councillor Passos highlighted some of older people that do live, but we know with the pensioners in the nice brick homes, but they're very cash poor, and if you lift their rates, that will have a serious impact. So if you amend it, I could support it like that, but not to just write to the Minister and say that's what the people here want when you don't know what the people want, really.
Now, councillors, it's 9:10. I've now got about 8 people with their hands up.
Just a reminder that there's an urgent motion as well.
No, I'm aware of that. It's 9:10. I've now got about 8 or 9 people with their hands up. We've only got one motion on the books. There's no foreshadowed motion. There's no amendment. So I'll go to Councillor McKenna.
Firstly, I just want to ask a question of the Chief Financial Officer. If the rates are redistributed and a different model is used for the collection of rates, can the bucket of money be increased, or does it have to be redistributed within that bucket of money that we currently have?
I'll put that question to the Chief Financial Officer.
Through the Chair, our bucket of money is the bucket of money. It cannot be increased without a special rate variation, so it just gets redistributed.
So the benefit, so the issue of raising extra rates won't occur. We'll still end up with the same amount of money at the end of the day, but we can redistribute more fairly. And of course, units, although we don't have too many multi-million-dollar units in this area, but unit dwellers all over lots of areas pay the same rate for no matter whether they're in a small unit, 1-bedroom unit, or a 3-bedroom unit with, you know, car spaces, etc. So there are real anomalies there in the rating system as it stands, but extra money is not likely to be. We're not likely to get. We won't be getting any extra money out of it.
May I move the motion be put?
Councillor Drury has moved that the motion be put. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor McKenna will second that. I'll put that. All those in favour, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Let's continue the debate. Councillor Hesse.
Very briefly, I guess in response to Councillor Macquarie's points, it's very clear from the Mayor's earlier intervention that, in fact, what we're dealing with is something which is on the books anyway. That's point A, so there's nothing to get upset about it because it's real. Councillor McKenna's made a very lucid contribution, I thought, about, well, okay, let's make it fairer. We don't get any more money out of it. It's an attempt to make it fairer. Thirdly, as Councillor Macquarie knows, any new policy will go out for community consultation, which is quite fair and reasonable, so we'll know what the community thinks about it, and I'm sure we'll all listen very, very carefully when it comes to rates. And fourthly, point B is asking for a report to be released. I'd say that there is, quote unquote, nothing to see here when it comes to being a beat up. I'd say this is a very reasonable request, and as we had a discussion earlier, we acknowledge that there's a problem with our rating system, Councillor Macquarie, and that this is impacting on our budget. We're not going to fix it by this one, but we need to start the discussion with our community. Thanks.
Is there anyone who has an amendment? No? Sorry, Councillor Iskander, I missed you before.
Thank you. Very important points being raised.
Could you turn your microphone on, Councillor?
Look, again, I congratulate Councillor Kiyat for putting this. He is really setting an example how to defend the disadvantaged people and how to make the real, if you like, balance between people should contribute to our community and people should benefit from that. But let me put these figures. First, I was involved in disadvantaged school program, and we were collecting the data about, okay, let's support the schools which the children came from disadvantaged background. We looked for the houses, and guess what? We found most of the very disadvantaged families, they living in houses that, if you like, principal who came from the Shire said they are not, because they have houses at that time worth $1 million. Honestly, this is what happened. And then we were able to go and find what is the real situation there. We found most of the people who bought their houses, they bought it cheap. Then the prices went up. Then they have to stay there, and they will be considered they are rich, while the fact is they are very poor. I talk about Tempe, I talk about South Marrickville, I talk about that side of Dulwich, and that could be the fact of the whole area in the inner west where we have people who are not really capable to have their enough food, and they are living in very rich houses. They don't want to leave. Maybe they can't leave. They don't know how to do it. They don't want to go to a new place. But the fact is, and I conclude by this, yes, I am for extra rate for the rich, real rich people who live in rich areas, and I am not supporting the blanket of it, So any house which 1.5 million should pay. Last thing I'm going to say, from Bankstown, from Sydenham to Bankstown project, please let me say this, 1 minute.
Move an extension of time of 1 minute for Councillor Iskander, seconded by Councillor Stamoulis. All those in favour, against, declare that carried. Please proceed.
Thank you. The fact is, when we said a new project to develop high rises from Sydenham to Bankstown, most of the developers came to buy the houses. They put the prices double. 1 million now became 2 million. And now, if you wanna judge it, what you gonna say to the poor man whose house was 500,000, jumped to 1 million, and now 2 million, he has to pay for it.
Thank you for that. Councillors, anyone who wishes to contribute to this debate for a motion that I think will be overwhelmingly supported? If not, I'll go to Councillor Kiat for his right of reply.
I should have said this in my opening comments, but this wasn't in the agenda and I misplaced the supplementary agenda. To be clear, I think it's important to allow us as a council to develop a rating system that will be accepted by the community as a progressive and fair way to raise our revenue. And so I agree with the comments, in particular about low-income people who live in high-value properties. I mean, that's already a problem, actually, the way that we raise our revenue, because we don't have adequate ways of making sure that that isn't causing financial hardship. So if you're a pensioner who lives in a $2 million house, you're paying more than someone who's got a really high salary but living in a $1 million flat. And that might not be fair. And so I think it's important when we create a progressive rating system that we can address those nuances. But I think the general principle that a $15 million house on Louisa Road in Balmain pays the same pro rata rate as a $500,000 unit in Tempe is just absurd. And so that is, I think, the general trend that we need to address, and we need to address nuances within that. And I'm sure that the IPART report into rating reform, which was delivered to the Minister over 2 years ago, does address that. And of course, the Minister doesn't want to release it. And I hope that we can start having a progressive conversation about rates with the new government.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll now put the motion. We need a seconder, sorry, I didn't confirm that previously. Seconded by Councillor Hesse. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried with Councillor Macri against. We have one urgency motion. Councillor Porteous, do you want to address the council as to why it should be considered urgently?
Yeah, sure. Classics in Cullen Park was due to be held in Cullen Park on the 24th of March this year. Unbeknownst to councillors and also unbeknownst to the community, rumours started being circulated that it wasn't going ahead. I was approached by a resident last week to try and find out from council staff what was happening about it. I found out the day before the council meeting that in fact council staff had decided to cancel Classics and instead to run Blues Fest in its place without officially telling either the councillors or the community. I'm saying this in terms of addressing the urgency factor because a few key things here, and one is the fact that this event was meant to be happening literally in a month's time, and there's been no communication strategy about what's been determined. But the other absolutely essential issues, the fact this is a much loved event which has run over a number of years, it's highly anticipated by the local community, is very important in terms of us providing different types of events for our diverse communities. And certainly Leichhardt Council had an enviable reputation in terms of supporting all genres of music, including the classics. We've had a very strong relationship. I think the councillors may have received an email from Metropolitan Orchestra basically outlining the very important role that Classics in Cullen Park plays in the suite of events that are provided in the inner west for this community, and the important role it plays in terms of supporting the arts. Now I'm addressing the urgency and the importance of us being urgently getting a determination on how we move forward. The motion, it's a standard motion, it actually says that we move forward with Classics in Cullen Park. So in order to address that, because this was meant to run in literally a month's time, and I was only made aware of this, and I think all councillors have only just been made aware of this now, hence the urgency for addressing this as soon as we can.
Thank you for that. I understand that it was considered by the chair at last week's meeting as to whether the matter should be considered urgent, and it was ruled that it was not.
No, actually that was not the case.
Oh, okay.
A question was asked of the council staff as to when an urgent matter is dealt with, and the council staff responded at the end of the business.
Oh, right.
Because we hadn't got to the end of the business, therefore it was determined that we couldn't address the urgent item that
Fine,
night.
no problem. I'm informed that the motion has been tabled for consideration at the ordinary council meeting next Tuesday. I am in support of the substance of the motion that Councillor Porteous is moving, and I will be supporting it at that time. I think it would be good for the people who are affected by the cancellation to be in attendance at the meeting when we discuss it. Given it is already tabled for the agenda, it is on the business papers for the agenda next Tuesday. I'm going to rule that it's not urgent, but want to reiterate my support for Councillor Porteous and thank her for bringing it forward. And I also don't believe that there's any chance of it being held on March 24th. If that were the case and it could be reinstated, then it could be considered urgent, but clearly that's not the case.
Oh, look, I probably don't have a right of reply, but
no, you don't.
I'm just concerned about the communications that are currently going out about it, because every day that's being delayed, the communications are going out from council staff and it's not being resolved.
Well, I'll just seek clarification.
And I only put it on the papers just in case there was any issue of it not being, to
but
make sure.
But I presume there are no communications going out about it because the council staff have cancelled the event. I'll just seek clarification from the officers about that. It'll have to be from the General Manager. You have to take that on notice. Okay. I think it was addressed substantively in the memo received from the Group Manager. So the event's not taking place on the 24th of March and there are no communications. So let's address the matter substantively and reinstate the event for a later date in the year through your motion next Tuesday. I'll rule that that's not urgent and I'll declare the meeting closed.